Welcome back to Office Hours Unplugged, where we chat with researchers and PIs here in McMaster. Today we bring with us to the studio Dr. Stuart Phillips. Thank you so much for joining us. Could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's Stuart Phillips. I'm a professor and actually the chair of the Department of Kinesiology.
Awesome. And I know we were just talking earlier about how you used to be a biochemist, or
Yeah.
you did a degree in biochemistry.
Yeah.
I guess you still are a biochemist.
Yeah, once a biochemist, always a biochemist. Yeah.
Could you walk us through your, I guess, academic journey from the very start and how you kind of got interested in science?
Sure, yeah. I think I described to students that probably when I was a kid, I got one of those backyard, chemistry sets and had a microscope. And I remember looking down a microscope and I was like, this is amazing. And I kind of, for me, that was the epiphany moment where I was like, science is for me. Went through high school. Biology was always my favorite. Chemistry, number two. I even enjoyed physics. I know that's a little weird, but really enjoyed science more than just about any other subject.
Right.
Came here to McMaster University. I'll say the years and blow you all away, but that was 1985 to 1989.
Wow.
And did my undergrad here in year one natural science and then years 2 through 4 in biochemistry. And I think I thought the whole time that I was going to end up doing medicine. And it wasn't until I actually I played rugby when I was here as an undergraduate, and I broke my leg in the summer before the last season, couldn't play. And so I ended up doing a senior thesis and just got in the lab, and I was like, this is amazing. This is, I really, really enjoy it. And then in my last semester of my fourth year, I took a biochemistry nutrition class with Dr. Stephanie Atkinson. She's still a faculty member in the Department of Pediatrics. And I was like, this is amazing. This is for me. And it sort of combined nutrition, which I had just begun to discover, biochemistry, and then my person that I met in my master's thesis, because I decided to stick around for grad school, was a guy named Mark Tarnopolsky. He's still a physician in the medical center, runs the neurometabolic diseases clinic, great friend. And I think between he and Dr. Atkinson, they're the real reason why I'm in science. And then, long circuitous journey to do a PhD at Waterloo, a postdoc down in Texas for 4 years, and then came back to McMaster, so back where I started.
And at that point, like during your master's, did you already know you wanted to go do your PhD and pursue research?
Yeah.
Or were you still unsure?
No, I was unsure, and I think that's something I relayed my unsureness to students these days. I really don't know what I want to do, and I'm like, I think everybody kind of expects that at some point, there's this lightning bolt that comes down and it's like you're certain of everything you want to do. And so for some people they do. They know their path, they know exactly what they want to do. But I think for most students it's an evolution of understanding about things that they enjoy, and it sort of just begins to grow on you, and you're like, I can see myself doing this. And I think the key part for me was I realized that at every juncture where I had a chance to branch off and do something different, I was enjoying what I was doing. And I still like school. I'm here, never really left school, but I still like discovering things. It's an amazing thing to be able to come into work and think like, what are we going to learn today? And here we are 30 plus years later. So, yeah.
Yeah, and so you did your master's in McMaster, and then did you also do your PhD here as well? Or?
No, I went to Waterloo for my PhD, mainly because my research had begun to shift a little more towards human physiology, and I really enjoyed the interaction with exercise physiology. At the time, it was still physical education here before it was kinesiology. And they only had a master's program in what they call human biodynamics. And so I knew I wanted to do a PhD. And I got some advice from, at the time he was my rugby coach actually, but he was also a faculty member in phys ed. And he said, there's this guy, Howie Green at Waterloo, does great physiology. He does the kind of work that you want to do. And I went there and, it was, the rest is history. But at no point did I ever feel like, you're going to end up being a professor and doing this until, and I know people think I'm joking when I say this, but literally until the day I got the job.
Wow.
And you sit down in your office, you're like, okay, I guess I'm doing this. And that was 28 years ago here. So yeah. It's been an evolution.
Yeah.
Been a good one. Yeah.
And just zooming out a little bit, so like, was your interest in skeletal muscle health and nutrition, was that like partly due to your mentors, or would you say because your experience with rugby and then you were kind of discovering research, did that play a role as well?
Yeah, like a combination of the both. I think, in truth, and I'll say this, hand on heart, is that Mark Tarnopolsky convinced me. He was like, dude, like, muscle is where it's at. You got to understand muscle because it's the key to everything. And at the time, biochemistry of metabolism was all kinds of tissues. It was liver, it was muscle, it was brain, it was adipose tissue. And he convinced me that muscle was the key, and I guess I took that to heart and then did the PhD in exercise physiology, studied muscle there as well, and just have carried that forward. But again, as an athlete, like I knew muscle was important for running fast and lifting heavy stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But now it's become a bit of an odyssey to understand what happens to older people as they age,
right,
and what happens to their muscle, and trying to keep it in tip-top shape. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's been a cool journey for sure.
And did you run into any obstacles along the way with your academic career?
Yeah. How much time you got? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's always, I think, like most things, there are peaks and valleys, and there's been lots of great things, but there's been lots of other times where research is a game that doesn't always work. And I say to my students, I know I probably drive them crazy with this one. I'm like, you know why they call it research? And I'm like, no. They go, no, why? And I'm like, because you have to do it more than once. They don't just call it search, And they're like, oh yeah. Lots of nights in labs and looking at stuff. I'm like, why didn't that work? And then you just grind through, and but I think that's life. I think life throws lots of things at you, and there are days when it's it's like, man, I'm on top of the world, and then something doesn't quite work out, and you're like, oh man, how am I going to figure this out? So, I think it's part and parcel. But there's been good and there's been bad, more good than bad.
That's great.
Were there any like notable experiences that you think really defined who you are as a researcher?
Yeah, I don't know, but like when I broke my leg, I honestly think I was slated to come back, and I was supposed to be captain of the team that year. We had a really good team. We were supposed to win the OUA and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, like it's dramatic to sound out. I thought like, that's it. Like my life is over. I just broke my frickin' leg, and I'm not going to get, out of something that was, a real low point for me personally. And I think, I was in a real deep funk, getting into the lab and spending time with people who were supportive and kind of joked and kind of picked me up a little bit, and then getting into research and realize, and then the research didn't always work, but the feeling I got when it did work, and the idea that you took a question, and even though it was a small kind of pushback, this was in the day, and I say this to my students, and they kind of laugh. I'm like, where if you sequenced a gene back then, you published a paper, like and now we've sequenced the whole genome, right? And it seems so trivial but I'm like, that was the state of the science at the time. And I don't know whether it was like that sort of moment, but every time I had the chance to, at the end of my master's, it was like, oh, what do I do? And I thought, I'll just write the MCAT and, I'll do that. And I did, and I got an interview, and I didn't get into medicine, and I thought, that's it. That's the worst thing ever. And I thought, you know what, though? Like, I'm kind of... And my dad was pretty instrumental in just sort of saying... He didn't go to university, and he just said to me, like, he pointed out to me, he said, son, like, you seem like you're enjoying what you're doing. And I said, yeah, like I do. And he goes, that's worth a whole lot of money. And, he's a pretty smart guy. So, he nailed it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And obviously that must have been, as you mentioned earlier, pretty challenging to get through all of that stretch of grad school and going to your PhD and then picking yourself back up. Yeah. Well, I imagine it must have been a completely different challenge when you actually got, I guess, affiliated and had to become a professor and run your own lab. That comes with its own set of challenges.
Sure. Yeah. You have the shoe comes on the other foot, right? I mean, I spent a lot of years being a grad student and then being a postdoc. I worked down in Galveston, Texas, so 50 miles south of Houston, right on the Gulf of Mexico. It was a great time. I wasn't married. It was just me I had to worry about. But I made some really great friendships that I still have to this day from that time. But knew that I wanted to come back to Canada, and the opportunity to come back here. Plus, I had at the time girlfriend, now my wife, that I knew I wanted to come back to as well, and she unequivocally said, "I'm not coming down to Texas." And I was like, "Okay." Well, so then the writing was on the wall, and so it's been a long journey. I think the biggest thing, in grad school is you don't make a lot of money, and I had friends moving to the next stage of their lives and getting jobs and getting married and buying cars and buying houses and everything. And I was still eking out an existence on TA pay and, a small scholarship. So that was, to look at them and go, oh, geez, and I could be doing more. But again, I was enjoying what I was doing, had some great experiences. But yeah, you get the faculty job and all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I've got to, become the person that had just mentored me, and I had some great mentors from Stephanie Atkinson to Mark Tarnopolsky. Howie Green was my PhD advisor. A guy named Bob Wolf in Texas was, they were instrumental in shaping how I looked at science and how I approached a lot of the way that I still do science here at McMaster. For me, and it's never really too far from rugby, to be honest with you. It's a team game. Really value contribution of fantastic students. They're all part of the team.
That's amazing. And now you mentioned your science, so let's move on to your science.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So outside of your academic work, you've really stood out as someone who's active in translating research for the general public, which I think is really important. So do you think the scientific community as a whole is doing enough to bridge that gap between what's published in journals and what people are actually applying in their lives? And where do you see the biggest failures in that communication?
Yeah, it's been an evolution. When I first got into this, so I was hired at McMaster in 1998. The venue was, and I come from grad school where literally you looked at about between 6 to 12 journals, and that kind of defined the field of muscle and exercise physiology at the time. The internet has changed the game. The number of journals now isn't 12. You could probably multiply that by at least 10, if not 100. Like there are new journals that happen every day. Online publishing, open access has become a de rigueur thing. So it used to be that you published an article, it got in a scientific journal, and you basically sat around for a solid week patting yourself on the back and going, look at me. And the cruel irony is that about 150 people would read that article because they had a subscription to the academic journal. And it begun to become painfully obvious, I think, when you realize that at Canadian universities anyway, it's a taxpayer-supported institution. Essentially, taxpayers pay my salary, right? So when somebody said to me, well, I remember hearing the first time, well, what about the translation of your findings? And I'm like, what is this translation you speak of, and they said, well, getting the findings out to the public. And I was like, geez, well, what do you do, like write a book or, what's the deal? And, now it seems kind of crazy to say, but, social media has turned people who aren't scientists into influential, so influencers have, shaping people's opinions. And I think scientists are having to play a catch-up game to sort of understand how do we get ourselves out there and make people understand what our science is about. Now, no job description here at McMaster has, as a faculty member, something that says you have to participate in social media. It's just not something people do. The reason I do it is that I taught an introductory first-year class in nutrition and metabolism for kinesiology students. And I used to have an assignment, and so here's the evolutionary arc to show you how long I've been doing this, where students cut an article out of the newspaper. And I know, like, the thought of doing that now is just bizarre, right? And then time went on, and nobody was handling a newspaper. They're like, so can I print something off the internet? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely, we can do that. And then it became, can I take a screenshot of something I've seen on, first it was MySpace, and yeah, I know it. Then it was Facebook, then it was Twitter before it was X, and then there was this Instagram thing, and now there's TikTok, and and so on and so forth. And now it would be an assignment where you would capture a piece of video of somebody saying something. And the whole point of the assignment was actually to get people to just gain a little bit of scientific literacy, to compare a newspaper and what a reporter said to an actual published article. And, and the original point of the assignment was actually get people to go to the library and learn how to use the search engine. Now you do it from home, but it's the same thing, right? What's legitimate, real science, like evidence-backed information,
right?
And what's just some dude or some woman saying this is the way things are. And in our field, in my field particularly, around muscle and protein and everything else, it's you rub up against it all the time. But we've got amazing folks at this university that are inventing nasal spray vaccines, and yet you've got a giant community who are opposed to vaccines. And so again, how do you fight that narrative?
Right.
It's not easy, right? So.
And that is, I will say, something I noticed is the internet has kind of become like a double-edged sword in a sense. Where obviously traditionally these scientific articles were like locked behind the paywall, or you had to pay for open access and all this stuff.
Sure.
And there was kind of like a divide between what the scientific community had a consensus on and what the general public, parroted, essentially. And do you kind of see currently the state of the internet that divide is being bridged more?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure there's easier open access to science, and there's a big move in science to make even data publicly available, so that other people outside of the scientific community could go and look at your data and maybe analyze it and interpret it differently. And so, I think that's the sort of next frontier. But yeah, there's been a bit of a democratization of knowledge and how it's available to the public. How just anybody can get access to these things. It's good and bad. I think the good part is I think that's great, that people have greater access to knowledge. The bad part is there's a lot of I did my research, or they did their research. And I point out to my students, and I said, well, there's an important difference. We do the research, and that's there's a lot of training that's gone into what I am able to interpret. I see research sometimes years ahead of when the public sees it. I'm reviewing papers of my peers. I'm looking at grants. And so, ideas evolve, and until it's in the public domain, the reality is that, nobody else knows about it unless you're on the inside. So I'm on the I'm an insider, I guess. But I have my own biases, but I certainly would say is that I'm challenged more out in the social media world by people who I don't know that I would say they're my peers, but they are definitely people who are asking questions that never asked questions previously. So and then that's. That's good or bad. You can love it or hate it, but I think it's how knowledge moves forward too. So, yeah.
And considering like a huge part of your research is actually aging, and you're actually like the chair in human skeletal muscle health in aging.
Yeah.
I'm curious, was that a position you always saw yourself in, considering, the effect aging has on skeletal health, or is that just something that kind of popped up and happened?
Yeah. I thought you were going to say I'm an expert in aging because I'm aging. And, I mean, we're all aging, right?
Yeah.
No. Yeah. No, it's good. Yeah. No, I when I first got into this, I think you could kind of divide my career, my time at McMaster into two phases. When I was first here and I was younger, I think we were very much about, how can we make younger people bigger, stronger, faster, and so more sort of slanted towards, I wouldn't say elite athletes. You never really get to work with truly elite. So like you get to touch them a little bit, but we take muscle biopsies all the time, for example. And if you're the elite of the elite, that just doesn't happen. So we've extrapolated from some fairly well-trained individuals up to elite levels. But I think probably about 15 years ago, the landscape started to shift a little bit. There was an increasing emphasis with the realization that the population shifts that are occurring, not just in Canada, but basically everywhere in North America, Europe, and globally, people were living longer. And so there was this tremendous push to understand what impact aging had on a lot of physiological systems. I think skeletal muscle would have been the sort of the last in line after things like what happens to your brain, what happens to your metabolic health and everything. But there's been a realization is that your muscle is core to obviously mobility. And when your mobility isn't good, then your world becomes a little smaller. When your world becomes smaller, your risk for chronic diseases, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, even cancer goes up. And so I think that we're beginning to enter this slightly new era where there's a greater appreciation for muscle's role beyond just mobility. Like it plays a lot of roles in glucose metabolism. It's a central organ in intermediary metabolism for lipids, for example. And its preservation as we get older is a key component to, quote unquote, to aging well. The funding landscape shifts. I get a little older, and so I've said, research becomes me-search a little bit, and things begin to change. And so I'd say that the work that we do in the lab now is kind of divided, maybe not even 50-50. Maybe it's skewed towards aging a little bit more, sort of 60-40. We do a lot of work in older individuals, and everybody's like, what's older? And I'll just say, 60 years plus. Mm-hmm. And up to, we've had folks in their 90s participate in our studies. So, yeah.
I mean, from your papers that talked about, elderly people and we're focusing on that, I think the main message I was seeing is just like moving is better than not moving at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, big, push on people adhering to physical activity guidelines and realizing the core role that plays in not just, everybody, and you guys probably, I've got sons your ages, I'm sure. They know the word longevity, and that was not something that was ever talked about when I was in university, but longevity has now become, and can we actually, materially change how people age? I don't know that we're there yet, but there's a lot of, obviously pushes in that direction. I think the concept that, I try and push is one of health span. So the proportion of your life that you're in good health, knowing that every chronic disease is associated with a reduction in health-related quality of life. And so from that sense, mobility is a core component of that. A core component of good mobility is being more physically active. A good component of, more physical activity is exercise. And that's the plan structured, I'm going to go out, go for a run, go for a walk, go to the gym, whatever it is with, I'm going to make myself a little bit stronger, fitter, or that sort of thing. So, and, it's almost embarrassing to talk about how good exercise is for you. It's like every day. And 10 years ago, if you said, exercise changes, structures in your brain and how they age. And I'd have been like, that just doesn't happen. And now we know that it does. And so, I'm learning more and more about that aspect of things. And it just, it comes back to, it's just such a core component of healthy aging, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm assuming the other half of your lab is centered around, I guess, protein metabolism and research around that. I'm curious to see from your point of view as someone who's, I guess, in the field. We've seen like I guess, and I've noticed a spike in sort of the commodification of just protein this, protein that.
Yeah,
this is this many grams of protein.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think that's like a step in the right direction? Do you think that's the population being more health conscious, or do you think maybe there's some pitfalls to that?
It's true. It's the proteinification of everything, literally. I think when I saw protein water or protein soda, I was like, okay, like we've gone too far. I've long been an advocate for people consuming more protein than what we call the recommended dietary allowance, or RDA. But how much more is a really key question. And there's this sort of, I call it health halo effect with protein right now, that if you add it to a food, it's like, 20 grams of added protein. And it's like, that's some sort of tagline for this is better for you than something that doesn't have protein. And that's not true. One of the things I have been pretty steadfast on is you can do all of the things in higher protein just with real food. Like you don't need protein water, you don't need protein Pop-Tarts, you don't need protein cupcakes, you don't need protein, and you name it, like from pancake mix to, it's appearing everywhere. There's going to be, and I'd be willing to bet this, 10 years from now, this realization that this protein fortification of just about everything does very little for people's chronic health without the addition of exercise. And we've stressed in everything that we've done that there are two main stimuli for muscle to either grow or slow down its loss as we get older. And the primary, and by primary I mean like much bigger, influential, is mobility, right? And then after that, protein it's an additional part. And the analogy I use is, exercise bakes the cake as far as muscle is concerned, and protein is a thin layer of icing on top. I mean, hey, who doesn't like icing, right? But but you got to bake the cake first, or you can just spread icing around, and it's that's. I guess that will be okay for some people, but it's a thin layer, so it's beneficial, but it's not the be all and end all. It's going to the gym and working or being physically active is a much bigger stimulus. Yeah.
And considering that you've also done research on dietary supplements for, maximizing athletic performance, I'm kind of curious because some of your research is for athletes and maximizing their performance. And as I mentioned earlier, some of your work is on elderly people.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like assuming all other factors are accounted for, because of course, every person is different. There's like costs, especially everything's so expensive.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what would be the difference between a dietary supplement you would recommend to an athlete compared to an elderly person who may just want to maintain their current muscle mass? Yeah,
I mean, I think the key point to emphasize athletes or older people is that supplements are, the true role of them in a diet is they're convenient, right? Is that they provide, or they can provide protein sometimes it's just protein if it's a powder, for example, and nothing else. And so, for athletes who are specifically aiming to change their body composition, so bodybuilders are a great example, sometimes they just want protein. They don't want carbohydrates. They don't want fats. They just want the protein. And in that sense, then you've got the convenience of a supplement. And for an older person, sometimes that can be all they need. They don't need to eat more calories really from other nutrients, and they just need protein. But I think that the core point is that when it comes to food, the really important point is that foods contain lots of other nutrients that we need as well. So, when somebody talks to me and they're like, well, I woke up and I had some Greek-style yogurt, so high urine protein already. Then I added some protein powder, and then I added protein-fortified, milk because we've got that. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. And then I had a protein bar, and I'm like, I think you're kind of overcooking it a little bit. And I'm like, what do you do? And they're like, well, I go to the gym twice a week, and I play intramural volleyball. And I'm like, power to you for going to the gym, intramural volleyball, all good, right? And not just the physical stuff, but the mental aspect of spending some time working, making yourself healthier and just being physically active. But I'm like, I don't know if all that extra protein is really needed for you. You could cut out the protein bar first. That's an ultra-processed food. It's, they're just, it's all ingredients coming together. And if we have a place where we can all agree we should probably, fight a better fight, it's against the middle of the grocery store where there's cookies and bars and lots of things. And, just drink some milk and eat some yogurt, but eat some fruits and vegetables. And everybody's like, oh, well, that's so boring. And I'm like, that's the point, is generally the boring stuff is the stuff that works. But it's not sexy. It doesn't sell. Protein bars, everybody comes out with a new protein bar, and it's such a disappointment because intellectually I'm thinking, is that the best you got, a protein bar? I won't mention names, but a few of the best influencers, in terms of followers and everything, it's like, this is a new protein bar. And I'm like, that's your intellectual contribution to the food space and betterment of everybody's health is a protein bar. Yeah. Do better, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And just kind of zeroing in on your research as a whole, what is a gap that your lab is currently facing, has yet to address, or is actively working towards, I guess? Yeah,
so a really big gap is for a lot of years, and loud and clear on this message, we've tested men and only men. Wow, that it's interesting actually. The first study I ever did as a master's student with Stephanie Atkinson and Mark Tarnopolsky, we actually tested men and women, and it was a difference, a difference between the two sexes, and that but I've gone away from that, and we would only test men with the idea that maybe different phases of a woman's menstrual cycle would impact the results. So the last, I think, 5 or 6 studies that we've done have been exclusively in women. We've shown that menstrual cycle phase probably doesn't have a big impact. We've got a cohort study going in women who are going through menopause right now. It's been classic to study premenopausal and postmenopausal, but that perimenopausal period hasn't been studied, and so we're doing a study in those women and trying to, in a sense, make up for a little bit of, backfilling the data. The good news is that the differences, if they are there, are relatively small. I think we can begin to say that we don't have to test men or women, or even men versus women. We can test men and women, at least in the interventions that we do. We find that from a muscle standpoint, they're more similar than they are different. Let's put it that way.
And you've mentioned before, of course, science is like a field of collaboration. So we're curious, is there any lab or other company that you're working with right now on a specific project?
Yeah, you know what? I have an email filing system that's pretty elaborate, but the biggest folder I have with subfolders within the big folder is its title is collaborations.
Wow.
And for me, that's actually it's my favorite part of science. I enjoy working with people. That's the core part of what really makes science tick for me. And we've collaborated with people in the United Kingdom, France, Denmark, Sweden, Australia, the United States, Brazil, and so science is a global enterprise, and we've always achieved, I think, our best science when we've collaborated with people that are able to address and answer questions that we couldn't.
Right.
And, like not to mention, like we've collaborated with people across campus in chemistry, biology, biochemistry, all kinds of things here at McMaster and locally as well. Folks at U of T, Western, Wilfrid Laurier, Waterloo, Guelph. But that's the part about science that really pushes buttons for me, and I really encourage my students to embrace the idea that science is a collaborative process, and to share ideas. I think is how as a group we're going to make the biggest advances. So. Yeah, I love collaboration. I don't know that there's any one group that we've done more work with, but I think that's the best part about science, to be honest with you. Yeah.
And I guess if you had to give a piece of advice for any up-and-coming researchers within your field, what would you give them? What would you tell them?
Get ready because it's tough, man. Sometimes, like a lot of things, there's good and there's bad. Be persistent, get ready to, ride out the tough parts because they happen. And, sometimes it's hard to see the other side. I think for a lot of us, COVID was just this dark pit of, like for me in particular, I'm an extrovert. I love people. And it was hard to just sit by yourself. I just that, little part of me died just about every day doing that thing. But, here we are on the other side, and I think it's, it was a crummy time, but everybody weathered it. But, like everybody goes through ups and downs. Sometimes you get grants. A lot of times, and more times than get them, you don't get them. Sometimes you put papers in for publication, and they get rejected. And for me now, I don't, that doesn't tend to bother me that much. But I have students who it might be their first paper, and we submit to a journal, and we think they've written a good paper, and I think it's a good paper, and we submit, and it gets rejected. Reviewers review it and say they sometimes write unkind things, and the student they're devastated, right? They're like, oh my God, this is terrible. I don't know if I can do this for the rest. And I'm like, it's okay. We'll submit to another journal. We got some good feedback here. Let's make some changes. And so get ready. It's a journey, but it's worth it. Yeah.
And we always like to ask this one last question, just because it's a little challenging.
Sure.
So it's okay if you're not able to answer it. But as throughout your entire career, is there a specific publication or maybe an accomplishment that you're most proud of as a researcher?
That's a good question, actually. I mean, there's been a lot, and I don't want to single out one or two publications, but we did have a publication recently. It was a collaboration. We did all the human work because that's what we do. Right. We don't use like preclinical or animal models in my group. Not that they're bad, but that's just not what we do. We collaborated with a group in the United States. The collaboration involved two former postdocs in the group, one of whom is now a professor at the University of Calgary. Another one is a professor at Queen's University, and a PhD student who's now defended and is actually doing a postdoc over in the hospital. Oh. And we worked with this group from the United States. They did a lot of work using knockout animals, which we could never do. And we basically came together to publish the first, I think, pretty good mechanistic data to show how resistance exercise, so weightlifting, triggered the activation of a specific protein that was responsible for how muscle grows.
Right.
No way we could have done that without the animal data, right? With a knockout animal, when we knocked that gene out, then the animal didn't grow. And similarly, when we overexpressed it, the animal grew more.
Right.
But we did the discovery work in the humans. And so it's actually started with us, but then, finished off by a great collaborator down at the University of Wisconsin. Came out just last year in a very good journal, got it was a little bit, I think, tougher for some people to grasp it, but it was a pretty big breakthrough. And like I in recent memory, I'd say that's probably the one that I'm most proud of. But there's been lots along the way.
Of course,
Sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Phillips, for sharing your story and your
You're
science
welcome.
with us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Really appreciate the platform.
yeah. It's honestly been a blast talking to you and listening to your story. And thank you to everyone listening. We'll see you next time on Office Hours Unplugged. Thank you, Dr. Phillips.
My pleasure.